some of the wrist knife fighting that you see in the Nuba practice. And as far as boxing forms, you have Dambe boxing, which is, gaining a lot of traction right now, which is practiced in Nigeria amongst the Butchers Guild. It may have spread out to be more than just that, but in traditionally it was practiced amongst the butchers in amongst the Hausa people. Masangwe, which is practice is former bare knuckle boxing practice amongst the Benda people in South Africa. You have various forms of boxing, kickboxing that's practiced in Madagascar, Moringi, and you have to excuse my pronunciation for some of these terms. But there's there's this various regional forms of this boxing, kickboxing form, whether it's emphasizing punching, emphasizing kicking, and kind of even, melding some more modern techniques into it. In the African diaspora, pugilism became a thing as well. So you have, I'm not sure if people would categorize capoeira as like a pugilist form, but I do, since it involves like kicking and percussive strikes. So capoeira, lajia or damier, mani, there's 52 hand blocks in North America. These are all like pugilist forms that have some kind of connection to indigenous African striking arts, whether it's technical or whether it's like a spiritual, cultural aesthetic, I should say.
All right. So, that's quite an expose. Thank you for that, and I very, very much appreciate that. What a lot of people are not aware of is we know out of for fact because there are hieroglyphics in the tombs in South Sudan as well as in Egypt itself that fighting forms, organized fighting forms, strategic fighting forms, wrestling for that matter, had predates a lot of civilizations around the world. And I know one of the fighting forms that were popularized as being part of the Olympics, which is Greco-Roman wrestling. They call it Greco-Roman wrestling. Obviously, I would say definitely had its origin in Africa for sure, because the Romans and the Greeks used to come to Egypt, just like everyone flocks to America today back in ancient times, because Egypt was the hub of civilization back then. So I would presume that all these things that were taken back to their countries before they became civilized, and before after the downfall of Egypt, obviously, as a civilization hub. But so we're talking about quite a bit here in terms of fighting forms, and what we want to talk about mostly is this origin of martial arts as a form. It's even said that the Shaolin that's been practiced in China, Kung Fu that's been practiced in China, and most of the East Asian art forms have their origin in Africa. In fact, they're supposed to be hieroglyphics, a representation of some of those forms in the tombs of Karnak, right? So can you delve a little bit into that, the origins of the fighting forms in the organized fighting form before it spread across the world and became something that military people used to fight against their enemies?
So I'll say this, especially in Egyptian wrestling. So Egyptian wrestling is like, you can tell that wrestling was highly revered and held a very special place in ancient Egypt. Just like in many African societies, it was a way for military training. It was also the fighting arts in ancient Egypt were more than just fighting. They also were used to kind of dramatize the defeat of Set and the resurrection of Osiris. So it had like a spiritual connection as well, for these fights. And so I will say this about Egyptian wrestling: when you look at the hieroglyphs, and especially if you are a wrestler, you will see a lot of techniques and movements that we still practice and know today. They were known and being practiced and documented 5,000 years ago. Egyptian wrestling has many things in common with many folk styles of wrestling you find in like West and East Africa, but it also has like many connections to like submission and catch style wrestling, and not to mention there's even like some judo type throws that are found in the art itself. I can't really say. I don't want to really say that everything came from there.
Right.
I mean, we all come from the continent at some point. I think sometimes what happens is we tend to make our timelines a little simpler than necessary. So, and I think that people tend to have a need to learn to protect themselves, just kind of as being human. And there are places and times where we find, more refinement or more advanced, people who have more advanced understanding. But like, I'm not for certain. I don't want to say that, that Shaolin Kung Fu descends from ancient Egypt.
Well, I'm just saying not necessarily that the form that's practiced, the way it is practiced, but like, there are, what we'll call, vestiges of what you had practiced back in those ancient times that kind of, like you said, obviously, obviously, every human being at some point in time is going to find a way to protect themselves, whether it's, developing something to use to fight somebody else, over time. Necessity is the mother of invention. We all create, we develop, we do things to make our lives convenient, to protect ourselves, obviously. But
exactly,
the thing is that we see most of what we experience out in the form of organized fighting. That most of this stuff were already recorded back in history in ancient Egypt, in the tombs, in the pyramids, in today's Sudan as well. So that's the premise on which I made that statement. Not necessarily everything whatsoever did originate. Yeah, I mean obviously, mankind came out of Africa. So when we say everything comes out of Africa, everything eventually came out of Africa. But anyway, let's switch gears and talk about the evolution of the fighting form over time. What has happened through time is that man used to fight each other hand to hand. It used to be hand to hand combat, and then the weapon systems were developed, and then eventually guns came in. So we found that more and more over time that there were less need for hand to hand combat, and as gun proliferated across the world. But definitely fighting forms have developed and evolved over time. And some of the most prominent ones that we have in the world today are obviously, of course, Kung Fu and the other fighting forms from Asia, Taekwondo, Karate, Jiu-Jitsu, Judo, Aikido. All those are fighting forms that came out of from Asia. These are derivations of different forms. But out of in the West, we noticed there were, I would say, two main ones, which was boxing and then wrestling. And out of those, we've had derivations for different forms, and then, of course, we have accounts of great fighting forms like capoeira. Which we know obviously has its origin in Africa, and it was widely used in Brazil. What can you say about the evolution of these fighting forms, and how can we not only trace but give account or give credit to its origins out of Africa?
Okay, so you mean like arts like capoeira, or just in general?
Yeah, I mean capoeira, and then of course boxing in its actual form, and then wrestling. Of course, we've talked a little bit about wrestling already. So, but
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think that what we need. I think that
is that a more broad-based question, or you want to streamline it?
Let let me streamline it for me real. Give it to me one more time what you want, and I'll tell you what I think.
Okay, give us
different places.
Okay, we know. Let me streamline. Let me go straight to capoeira for one, which is an art form that evolved. Well, actually, I won't say evolved, but kind of would say was eventually recorded and accounted for as a fighting form from out of Brazil. That was attributed to former slaves that developed the art form for various reasons, So what can you say about its evolution, and what can you say about its origin, of course, to what it is today?
Gotcha. Gotcha. Okay, so capoeira is one of those arts that I think that for me, it was my entry art into African martial arts. When I first started studying it, I was one that's completely attracted to the art because of because of the movement, because of the music, and honestly, like by watching it, because I had already been training martial arts for several years, and I wasn't too interested in it as a fighting art, but there was something about it that was kind of like nagging me and kind of drawing my attention. So, as I began to research it, I was like, oh, okay, this martial art was created by, enslaved people in Brazil. And, they put all these elements into it in order to kind of disguise this dance. And it's like, okay, cool. Keep training, keep studying. And then it's like, as I started to delve into it, it's like, okay, it's one thing. So it's one thing to say that enslaved people created something out of a necessity, and it's based off of all the tools and information they had while they were enslaved. It's another thing to say that, these people brought with them their cultures, and their life was not just trying to be human in a very inhumane circumstances, but also how to maintain a connection to what they had lost. So then it's like, okay, so if they brought with them indigenous forms of fighting, and that's the leap that we have to take and acknowledge, if they brought with them indigenous knowledge to the West, and they are fighting to maintain it and to make it make sense in their new environment, that must mean that there must be a parent art that's being practiced somewhere over there. And so then that was my leap. So now I'm training capoeira, but now I'm looking for a parent art. Okay, so I'm looking for what was the art that inspired the enslaved Africans to create this or to develop it, so to refine this.
Right.
And so I think that as practitioners, and for me, it's that's what we have to acknowledge, because it's easy sometimes to this is for the diaspora, it's easy to dismiss the fighting arts of the diaspora because their proximity to Europeans as being they were just copying Savate, and they were doing Savate with tribal dancings and music, and they made capoeira, or they were doing Haitian machete, they were doing French fencing with African stick fighting, but we don't acknowledge that there were African societies that were using swords that were very similar to the type of blades they were using in the fields. So it's we have to understand that there are parent arts that when people came over, they brought not just themselves, but they brought a part of them with them. They brought their spirituality, they brought their culture, they brought their languages, their cuisines. All these things came with them, and what we see is the story of them trying to hold on to these things. And, sometimes, we're losing this. Capoeira came over, and so Central African warfare.
Right.
How warriors are trained in Central Africa. So the way warriors, and this is from my understanding, I'm not an expert in this area, but I'm speaking just from my research, and if you ask me a month from now, I may have more information and have a more enlightened understanding of what was happening. But from where I'm standing now, this is where I can speak from. So Central Africa had a very unique way of training warriors for combat. And one of the things that they emphasized was dynamic evasions, being able to like avoid percussive and edge weapons, and they had dances that kind of helped develop this. One was the Nsanga dance, and the other was the Ngolo dance, and I'm sure there were others there in practice.